welcome everyone. Thank you for making time to join us. We've got a lot of interesting topics to discuss today. My name is Henry Park. I'm co-founder and executive partner at PandoBlocks. PandoBlocks is a professional consulting and technology provider led by experienced executives who have successfully transformed household names, enterprises that you know of like Blizzard, Honest Company, Disney, United Talent Agency, and we did it firsthand. So big difference, right, in our ability to lead a lot of these transformations. It's very different than working with organizations like Big Four consulting agencies that are really looking at this from an academic and analytical perspective. And so there's so much going on today around digital transformation. And the other topic that we're going to talk about today is security. And what's funny is, you know, we get a lot of clients who come to us about one or the other, and it's never about both of them. And as leaders who've done this before, those two things sort of go hand in hand with each other. And so we thought it was good for us to have an event to join those two topics together. And our goal today is to really show you how when you join those two together, you can have a much faster ROI, a much faster time to transformation, save a lot of money, and really create a lot more velocity for your business as you scale and grow. When we talk about security, there's so much press going on about topics that I'm sure a lot of people don't know about, right? SolarWinds, who's SolarWinds? What's that mean to the business? There's a lot of technical speak going on, but really what's going on with SolarWinds is a supply chain breach that we're going to get into, and we're gonna talk about what it is and what it's not, and how it's affecting every single one of us, regardless of whether we're a small company, we're a big name company, it's all affecting us. And so we're going to get into that. Some of the people here who are going to be talking about this are people who've had a lot of experience with this. We're going to have Bob Van Dusen, who is head of security and IT operations for all of Blizzard, speak about this first. What a lot of people don't realize is that there's only one other company that was transferring as much or more network traffic than Blizzard Entertainment. It's Netflix. A lot of people know about that. A lot of millennials know more about Blizzard than they do Netflix. But he was able to manage the security for Blizzard while heading up all of IT operations for 14 years. It started with 2 people in his team, ended with 250 in his team, supporting 6,000 enterprise employees globally, and was able to do that without getting his name in the front cover of Wall Street Journal about a security breach. And so he definitely has a thing or two to talk about this. He spent the last 20 years in digital environments. Not a lot of CIOs can say that, and I definitely see a difference in the way he approaches problems, because the last 20 years has been basically building companies in the internet. A lot of companies today are thinking about moving processes into the internet, not building companies in the internet, and that's what he's been doing for the last 20 years. And so it brings a wealth of knowledge and perspective to this conversation. Jim Renaldi, he's currently the Chief Information Technology Advisor to the Office of the Director of JPL. It's a long title. It just means he's got a cush position because of all the experience he's had. He's the former CIO of JPL and former CIO of FDA, former CIO of Marriott. And so he definitely has some experience in dealing with nationwide topics around IT. And we'd love to get his perspective on what's going on with this breach and how he would handle it and how he's been handling with JPL. Brett, CFO of Mobscene, he's going to talk about digital transformation and how that is so important around security and what he's experienced over at Mobscene. He was a finance executive for Disney, Warner Brothers, and AIG as well, so wealth of knowledge. Billy, he's a talented developer, architect, and security nut. We call him Billy the Wolf. He's the guy who solves problems. The more complicated the problem, the better he feels about it and enjoys it. But he did a lot of different transformative work over at Disney, Warner Brothers, DirecTV. His claim to fame is building the largest API network in the world, transacting trillions of transactions a month through Disney. And Nicole, very senior security executive, who's led a lot of heavy compliance regulated security engagements for executive teams over at IndyMac, Disney, and The Honest Company. So a lot of wealth of knowledge in this group to talk through. Whatever questions you have as we discuss this, please post them on the chat. We'll be filtering them through and adding them in for the end of this discussion. We've saved a good chunky 20 minutes for Q&A, and so if you guys have any questions, just please post them on chat. We'll be saving them. Now, next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about SolarWinds. It's made a lot of headlines, and it's still making headlines. I think at some point people are going to get sick of it. There's so many different new breaches that are coming out because of this supply chain breach. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard about it. They don't know what SolarWinds is, what it does. And so let's start off by talking about what it is and what it isn't. And Bob, if you don't mind going over that with us, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks, Henry. Well, the breach it's an unusual and very sophisticated attack. SolarWinds is a tool used by technology companies, groups to monitor infrastructure and systems, make sure that they're functioning properly. This type of attack, we mentioned, it's known as a supply chain attack, where the attackers came in and corrupted and weaponized SolarWinds' own product to use against their client base. In September 2019, the attackers accessed the SolarWinds systems, and almost immediately in that same month, the attackers used and injected some code into the SolarWinds software, their development supply chain. It was test code, fairly innocuous, and most likely just a proof of concept to see if it was noticed and detected. Turns out it wasn't. In February 2020, they compiled and deployed what's known as, or what's being called as the Sunburst Malware. The malicious code was inserted into Orion platform. Orion is the product of SolarWinds. That's the issue. And it was released by SolarWinds as an update to their clients beginning in February 20th of 2020. Now, March through May, as these clients had downloaded the malware, that malware phoned home and basically said, "Hey, I'm here, I've been installed, and here's some artifacts to things that I found on the network." Those artifacts then led to identifying who had been infected. And the attackers then basically profiled and probably prioritized the list. And in May is when they actually had hands-on keyboards for the customers that were affected. Now that the hands-on keyboards from the attackers to those clients that were affected was a very extended period of time. It was estimated May 2020 through December 2020 until it was found out. They tried to cover their tracks. So in June of 2020, the attackers removed the malicious code from SolarWinds so that if there were scans, presumably it wouldn't have been found. It was finally found out by one of their customers, FireEye, which was another well-known security company. They had some pen test tools that were stolen. And they did a bunch of research and come to find out that the breach came through the SolarWinds product that they were using. And then it was finally released to the public. The attack was disclosed on December 12th. And since then, we've heard a lot of repercussions. As an example, December 31st, Microsoft disclosed that their source code had been accessed from approximately July 20th through December 20th. The attackers had access to the SolarWinds customer systems and pretty much unfettered access. So out of the 33,000 customers SolarWinds claims using their software, about 18,000 of those clients downloaded the software. Some of those are major government agencies, 425 of the Fortune 500 companies, all of the top 10 telecommunication companies, the top 5 accounting firms, Microsoft, Cisco Networks, Palo Alto Networks. It's been quite extensive. So you're on mute, Henry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, the scale of what's going on over here is really big. We get that. What is it not? Like, what are a lot of the things that people are thinking it is, and where it's not? Jim, do you have any insights to that?
Well, Henry, first of all, hello, everyone. These kind of attacks get at a different than prior type of attacks when there's supply chain, because it's a trusted type of attack. You're trusting these partners in the process of and in your supply chain. And so it creates another anxiety, a set of fear, a set of things that you need to pay attention to and learn from as you go forward. So I look at this as something that is not going to be unusual in the future. This is with the evolution of technology, the evolution of contracting out many things like I do. I contracted out half of my IT at JPL, and you have to be vigilant on all parts. And so now you have to start designing in place that for security, you have to design where trust is not assumed. And so as you look at your supply chain, I really do feel that in this particular one, there's so much to be learned because it's still ongoing. But my first reaction when I heard of this is how far did they get? It sounds like the breadth is pretty large. Who will they go after? Because if they are able to inject their code into systems, as I understand it, they will then gain access to various systems. Most likely they won't try to get after 18,000 companies, but they may go after some very interesting ones. Unfortunately, JPL tends to be very interesting to a lot of nation states. So we have to take precaution. Now, we don't think we were impacted by this based on my conversations with the security teams. But you still have to be vigilant, even if you don't think you've been impacted, and make sure all the tools and all the capabilities are reviewed. So we did that. We'll keep monitoring, and because we're funded by the government, we'll also have access to classified briefings and things like that, so we can understand the real nature of the attack as we know more. And that's unfortunately the real key message here is we don't know enough yet, but we know enough to plan for the future that you've got to stay vigilant.
Hey, Bob, I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. You've dealt with many three-letter acronyms, in the 14 years that you've built Blizzard. I've heard stories about you dealing with, potential intellectual property being stolen in China and dealing with governments around that. how is this attack so different than what you're used to dealing with before?
I think it's really Jim mentioned the breadth of the attack. So in the past, most of the attacks that we heard were localized to the victim. So an attacker would go after a potential target. If they were successful, they would breach their systems, install malware, multiple backdoors, so that if some were found out, that they would have other opportunities to get in. And then they'd spend time in there and figure out what they have access to and how they can take advantage of it. This is much different, because in the supply chain attack, I'm just going to let me paint a worst case scenario just to kind of illustrate an answer to the question. So on that list of clients for SolarWinds is Cisco Networks and Microsoft Networks. Worst case scenario, let's say, for instance, they were affected and these attackers are very sophisticated, and they were able to, when they had the hands on the keyboard before anybody knew about this, were able to plant multiple backdoors and get into their supply chain. Cisco Networks supplies routers for the internet. They basically are the internet. As far as connectivity goes, there's a lot of other companies that do it, but they have a huge market share. If they were breached and their supply chain was interrupted, and they were able to do the same thing and be able to plant a backdoor into Cisco's code, it could be, catastrophic. So that's the main difference, is rather than talking about one victim, you're talking about exponential victims potentially.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty scary stuff. Jim, is there things that you could share about how JPL has been dealing with this breach for all of us to learn from?
So I think, I think again, we've investigated it. We understand the nature of the attack. I think it's very important to work with the suppliers that are named in the attack and make sure that, and we have, that, we understand what fixes we need from Microsoft, from Palo Alto, from, the companies that we deal with. We're not a SolarWinds customer, but, that doesn't mean that we couldn't be, it doesn't mean we couldn't be impacted. So we have to look at the suppliers, make sure that they are keeping us up to date on their version of the attack, and make sure we communicate that to all our technical teams to make sure that the right fixes are in place. The other is, how do you communicate about this? I know you may ask me that later, but inside JPL, you get a lot of engineers who will worry about this. And so it's important for the team to convey confidence and convey technical capability, as well as translate that to management talk, so that people know how to talk with that. Because, for example, I saw 60 Minutes, I guess it was a few weeks ago, had a story on this. And the first thing I thought about was, oh my God, we're going to get a whole bunch of questions from the board of trustees, or we're going to get questions from the leadership. And that's typically how it happens. And be prepared for how to discuss this. And so that's internally how you would look at that. Externally, though, you would look at, who are the actors? You would try to find out who the main actors are, and look for indicators of compromise, and look for signatures that these particular actors like to make when they are able to breach a system or a set of systems. Having been through something like this before, not the breadth of this, but something like this before, where the attackers get so far in, but they don't get all the way in, you learn how to determine that. Usually it's a human error, and you close it, mitigate it, track it, report it, and hopefully have it resolved, and architecturally fix it for the next time.
So how do you communicate this if you do have a breach?
Yeah. Well, I having unfortunately had to communicate one too many, is that you have to do the translation, as CIO had to do the translation between technical to executive, and change the conversation from the technical talk to more about the impact. And sometimes you had to tell the bad news. Sometimes you had to say, we don't know enough yet. Sometimes you had to say, we haven't mitigated, but we're still watching. You never want to declare victory. All that means is you're setting yourself up for success, for failure. And so you just want to convey confidence to whoever, whether it's board of trustees or whether it's, I've also been on boards of a nonprofit that got attacked, and, and asked the questions. So I was on the other side of the questions. And it's very important that you allow the presenter to convey the facts, and that you stick with the facts. Let the technical teams deal with speculation. And I'll tell you one quick story. We had someone do a presentation who was trying to be impressive, and they mentioned that our great big deep space network could be vulnerable to attack. And they tried to demonstrate how that could happen. It turns out that was not true at all. But it worried the executives so much that we had to go through a whole bunch of work to prove that that was not the case. So it's very hard to prove a negative. And so we had to spend that time doing that. So be careful how you communicate. Technical teams need the freedom to communicate the way they want, but control the communication enough, but with honesty, transparency, and fact-based versus speculation is my recommendation, having been through this one too many times.
Yeah, no, that's good advice, because technical teams tend to want to think the worst case scenario in case something happens, and that's real dangerous to deal with. Bob, what about you? Any recommendations on how to deal, with customers when it comes to breaches like this?
Well, I think that's a webinar in itself, but just at a high level, Jim covered some very good points. First of all, keep it fact-based. Make sure that you're disclosing what is necessary, and also be thinking about what's really at risk as far as the business is concerned, and keeping your communication zeroed in on the risk and how best to mitigate it with the facts that you currently have. As far as communicating to customers, that goes back to my comment about a larger subject, but we tried to always be proactive. And I established a core group across all of many departments. It had representation from legal, from HR, from PR, IT, executive. And what we did was we went through some worst case scenarios. What would happen if X, Y, or Z happened? And we'd basically declare it, and that team would then go through the process. What would we have to do? And so we had canned PR scripts that were ready to go. We had gone out to security companies and pre-negotiated terms for doing forensics. And I'll tell you, if you do that when you don't have a problem, you have a lot better leverage, and it is a lot cheaper if you do that. But that kind of planning, that pre-planning is really helpful, and establishing a team like that, it doesn't, everybody has their day jobs, but if you can have them put in 8 hours, 16 hours a month to work on that, and just over time chunk it away and have that plan in place, it makes a heck of a lot of difference if something were to happen.
Yeah, the pre-negotiating the security contracts is brilliant, and your statement about when it's too late, it's hard to negotiate. It's the same with banks and loans, and and getting money when it's, when you don't need it, right? It's the same kind of strategy.
It's a little bit, yeah. That all of that is true, but if you think about it, when you have a gun to your head and things are, the stuff hits the fan, you're not thinking as straight as you could be, and so if you do that pre-planning and you have the scripts and you've run through the scenarios, you've already planned for what you can anticipate. And I'll guarantee that there's a lot of what you don't know that you didn't anticipate, that you could then spend your cycles on handling that rather than the stuff that you could pre-plan for.
And let me just weigh in real quick, Henry, real quick, is that executives expect and boards expect a sense of urgency without a sense of panic. And that's really to Bob's point, that we make sure that we're conveying the confidence and that they're receiving that confidence.
I love that sense of urgency without a sense of panic. You could write a book on this stuff. Here, since quick time check, we're almost at 12:30. Let's transition this into the digital transformation side. So how does this all tie into digital transformation? If you get into the next slide, please. So when we're talking about security, most people who aren't in the cloud, if your business is not online yet, it's not a digital business, you're going to tend to think that security is a project or is a technology you buy. But if you look at this reference architecture, this is our reference architecture of how a business should live in the cloud. And if you look at this, security actually encapsulates everything, encapsulates workflow, encapsulates all the departments, all the systems that tie into the departments, all the training, all the data. So there are two things that are really important in a digital business. It's security, and the other is a single source of truth. So what do we mean by a single source of truth? It means what data you're measuring the business is the same in your finance systems as is in your operating systems, as in your marketing systems, and so that you know what the business is actually measured on, right? Regardless of what department you're in. And so those two things need to be top of mind when you're building a business on the internet. Next slide, please. So why is it important for executives to know this and to be involved in a digital transformation? Well, the days of IT just being a support arm is like 1990s, 2000s, right? We're way past that now. So now as an executive, you've got to look at technology as a way to increase your enterprise value. We're talking doubling, tripling, quadrupling your exit, right? We advise a lot of companies that are, been around for 15 years and are moving into digital formats. But we also advise companies that are in their Series C, Series D. We don't know of one company that's in Series C or D that is not focused on technology as its core business function. None. And so, now that we're in the age of, advanced data applications, artificial intelligence, automation, digitizing your workforce, all of these things are actually going to increase the value of your business. It's not just a support function anymore, right? And so, a lot of what we're talking about today is so important for CEOs and CFOs to be involved in. And, we've been getting a lot of requests by the bosses of our CIOs that we support around these two topics, and these conversations always end up in some sort of enterprise valuation discussion. Next slide, please. So when you're talking about a digital transformation, another big fallacy is that they think it's a project that you throw onto the IT team or the marketing team or whatnot. This is digital transformation. The way we look at it, it's like climbing Mount Everest. This is not something that just a department goes through. Your entire company is going through a digital transformation, and it's climbing Mount Everest. When we go help companies through it, the last thing our clients want is just a report for them to follow. You know, you have to be in there in the trenches with them. It's like when you're climbing Mount Everest, you know, you can read a book on it, but when you're in there at ground zero climbing up, well, yeah, you better have a guide with you if you really want to survive the trip. And so, you know, when we talk about digital transformation, we're talking about challenges that every C-level is going to experience, and it just includes the CEO, unfortunately. And you have to look at it as a company-wide project. And so, you know, we're talking about priority setting from a company-wide level, you know, starting from the top all the way down, because a lot of those priorities are going to change. A lot of the culture is going to change. The C-level is going to be involved in practical problem solving. You know, this isn't something that you can just expect people from the ground up to figure out. Sometimes you have to get involved. Challenging the establishment, you know, hey, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. This is how it's always been. You need to challenge those things because it doesn't behave that way in the internet. You know, you have to be a lot more responsive. You got to let your customers in. You have to let market demand in and respond to it very quickly because, you know, there are clicks of buttons now. Problem predicting, you know, you don't want to deal with not having the right equipment, you know, halfway through the climb to Mount Everest. You know, you got to predict when you're going to need what, right? And so, you know, a lot of our competitive, consulting companies, they focus on problem solving. The way you look at it is, if you're solving a problem in digital transformation, it's probably a little too late, right? You should have predicted that along the way. And then breaking silos, it's common. It's the most common thing, and you know, it's the biggest complaint. Those silos existed because that's how it served the company before. Those silos don't work in the internet. It's, you know, you have to break those in order to create the velocity you need in the business. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about digital transformation, there's a typical way to do it, and there's another way to do it that gets a lot faster traction. So the typical way to do it is to do it in siloed projects, and you break them up, and you have each department do their projects, and you regroup, you know, every quarter, every year, and that's the typical way of doing it. But that creates a lot of rework. And that's the reason why people think that digital transformations take 2 to 5 years, sometimes 8 years. That's why. But if you take a swarming approach, and the swarming approach includes a lot of collaboration, breaking silos, cross-functional team meetings, right? Stacking projects together, not in a linear format, but on top of each other. When you do swarming, we've seen up to 75% savings in the timeline of a digital transformation. We're talking transformations that people were thinking would take 2 to 3 years, done in months, right? But done in quarters and months. And so there is a way to do it. Security is one of those things that you need to stack in the digital transformation. Otherwise, you're going to go back and redo a bunch of things. Security needs to be involved in data. It needs to be involved in workflow between the systems, in the cloud, on your network infrastructure, and all of that. And so while you're tackling all of these projects with different departments, you need to wrap security around all those things. And so very important to do that. Next slide, please. So, you know, when we talk about breaking silos and tackling all these projects together in a stacked fashion, what that leads to is a report like this. And we get a lot of like, what is that? When we present this to clients and even other consulting firms, they're not used to seeing it this way. But when you stack a bunch of projects together and a lot of workflows together and departments and cross-functional, a lot of the CIOs that have been born in the cloud, they don't look at the silos, right? Because they don't look at it that way. They look at it like this. You know, these are mega processes of a business. This in particular is a consumer product goods business, but everyone, whether you're in IT, security, operations, marketing, finance, doesn't matter. Everyone looks at it this way, right? Should look at it this way, because ultimately the technology is there to help these workflows and enable the people. And so, you know, this is the way. Once you get through stacking these projects and then looking at it from a digital lens for the business, and you look at it from a business lens of the digital world, this is how it looks like. And so let's take an example of a digital transformation that Brett's led. Brett, CFO of Mopsine, again, a lot of experience in finance executive management, various different companies, very large companies that we all know about. He's led a digital transformation at Mopsine as the CFO. I want to stay here on this slide, Brett. For your digital transformation, what were some of the mega processes that were involved?
Thanks, Henry. I think to kind of speak to my experience at Mopsine, almost all of these, even though this is a consumer product example, we're still present in Mopsine. We were concerned about how do we hire employees, how do we onboard to offboard them, and why? How do we work with our suppliers? Even went back to what Bob and Jim had mentioned. You know, we use Cisco, we use Microsoft, we use all those things. Okay, how do they play in our space? You know, we get into our customer service, our sales, our from order to cash, all the way through that project management. We had to lay it all on the table. You know, you're not going to transform your company by taking baby steps. You really have to look at this, understand it. And equally important to that is make sure you assign it the right colors. Like as you have in this chart, are the reds really the highest priorities that need the most significant impacts? Are the yellows in the middle? Where are the greens? What do we think is okay? Is it truly okay? And from that, you can then start to actually transform. If you don't understand that, you're just kind of, you're repainting the door, if you will, versus remodeling the house, you know? Right. And so for us is we sort of disguised it, if you will, as an ERP implementation, but it gave us access to all parts of the business, from the sales, the project management, cash flow, hiring and firing of people, all that inside an ERP, but it got us to this. And I think that's what's really helped Mopsine go from, you know, a very successful, strong, creative organization to what I was hired to do a number of years ago. And I think you mentioned this earlier, come to Mopsine and increase the enterprise value of this company. We're really good at what we do, but we want to increase that value. And this is the first thing that we looked at. Let's start to transform this business, because we can't do it doing it the same way we've always done it.
Yeah, your story is really interesting because, you know, a lot of CFOs are focused on finance numbers, but you've touched, you know, so many different mega processes for your business. What are some of the KPIs that you could talk about, you know, that you were involved in that typically just from a financial lens, people wouldn't really see?
Well, I think one of the big ones that certainly helped us, and why we kind of disguise this as an ERP, is like many finance organizations, it takes you a couple of weeks to close your books, then you have to report on it, then you meet with management teams, you eventually go to the board, and now, oh, we're back into closing again. By starting with ERP, we collapsed our close schedule from, call it a month, to about 2.5 days. So, you know, we're sitting here on the 9th of March. We've already done our management meetings for February. The board will have their stuff this afternoon. And the nice part about it, to your question, so I'm done with the finance part. The accounting part's done for the month. I now get to go play in IT. I get to go play in ops and sales and just about anywhere else I want to, because I can come back to this slide as, hey, look, we've identified, you know, planning and forecasting as a red bucket. Let's have a meeting to discuss, are we transforming it? Is it flipping to yellow or green?
Brett, that's not always a good thing for the CIOs that the CFO is dabbling in IT. So I just want to point that out in defense of my comrades. But I do think a good place for the CFO to get involved is understanding the value of the data now that they can analyze and look at future directions for the company and advise the company on where to go in terms of improvements based on the data that's now more available to you. So I'd be interested to hear how you think about that.
I don't know if I want to tell you, Jim, if you don't like me playing in your space, why should I give you my secrets? You know? But you hit on a very good point, and what Henry kind of started the section on, you know, that single point of truth, those key metrics are what you're looking at, that running the IT at JPL, the same thing the finance organizations look at, the same thing the sales organizations look at, say, okay, we know what our numbers are, we know where we're supposed to be. And equally important, again, we know why we're not there. Why is there a variance to that? So, you know, at least in Mobscene, which is very much a creative professional service type organization, I eat and breathe timesheets, utilization, who's on projects, how long do things take, how much extra bandwidth do I have in the system, where do I need to reinforce systems, resources, people, et cetera, where do I need to take away from? And and all the managers see that. You know, everyone said that is the utilization numbers. That's how we calculate. That's how we look at it. That's what our tolerances are. And whether you're in sales, IT, ops, HR, you can see that information. And that's helped us know, okay, look, we're picking up speed or we're slowing down. Oh, this group is surging, this group is falling back. And it's given that level of transparency and texture that we all believe it, we know it, we can now make a better business decision off of it.
Let's touch on some of the challenges that you've faced. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, you know, what were some of the challenges you faced? You know, what were the challenges that your previous CFO faced that you broke? How long was the previous CFO working on this transformation? How fast were you able to do it? What were some of the challenges that you've faced and conquered along the journey?
I mean, I think this slide lays it out very nicely. I mean, because really, I came in as a new CFO to increase enterprise value, to change really what the company was, which is right there in the yellow, challenge the establishment. You know, coming from the outside and say, okay, hey guys, let me understand what's going on. Let me understand where the issues are and how do we start going about fixing it. And in order to do so, you need to get involved in the culture. You need to get social currency. You need to be part of the organization and get that trust. You need to sit there and say, hey, from the company perspective, what's important? You know, company-wide, this is why it's important. And then go to, you know, Jim and his IT tower and say, look, your priorities are second tier right now because the company really needs to do this first. And getting him to see that, agree it, understand it, and ultimately support it. So now you go, okay, great. Jim's going to be my ally as we start to transform the company. And he might have a way to look at problems that I can't see. But now I'm starting to build my swarm team. I'm starting to get that momentum. I'm getting the right people involved that I can then start to move on this stuff. If I did it all behind a closed door, I'd be back in that linear model you had. Looked very evolutionary. You know, it takes decades upon centuries to evolve versus, okay, a swarm can happen in a couple weeks, a couple months. So for us, as we did our ERP and kind of started our tech stack from scratch, and we're done in about 4 months. So, and then for us,
how long was your previous predecessor working on it?
I want to say it was probably about 1.5 years and never really got like the traction. Didn't have some of these things. I don't think it did what this slide lays out to tell us to do. You know, predict the problems. Okay, well, do you know what the red and yellow slide are saying? Do you know what questions to ask? Do you have the right people on your team to help with that process?
Okay, I feel like I need to give Jim some.
You want a rebuttal? Can you mute people on this?
It's probably not. It's probably not a rebuttal as much as we would be so far ahead at that point in terms of what we think needs to be transformed anyway, because IT gets to see it all. Mm-hmm. So I think the real key is creating that partnership that says, you know, we could really impact this area and then be focused on that, like you said, and get it done in a timely manner. I so happen to agree. These projects that go on and on and on and never end, never do end. And so having a champion in the C-suite that really helps the IT organization focus and get the resources it needs to accomplish what needs to be done, that is really part of the panacea of a good working relationship. And the company does look at when the C-suite works together. People do watch that. The biggest question, though, I would ask you, Brett, is culture is sometimes one of the hardest things to change in a company, even an internet company, cultures get defined pretty quickly. And I'm wondering your experience in overcoming cultural things that also need to come along while the good culture and changing the bad culture if you can.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think, like you mentioned, IT touches everything, but so does finance, so does HR, and fortunately, in a company of our size, I get to play in all those spaces. And it's been really important, again, using this as sort of like the tool was to, spend time with, the sales team and say, okay, what do you do? How does this work? And actually a very short story as well. When I started at Mobscene, I actually spent about 2 hours or so with the head of one of our departments in my office. And my office actually has a window that you can see into my office to see who's in there. Great conversation, like I said, about 2 hours long. As the manager left and walked back to his office on the other side of the building, he got stopped by 3 people asking if he was okay. I'm like, he's like, why? He's like, there's no reason you would be in the CFO's office for 3 hours unless you were just getting ripped apart or whatever it was. And this guy's like, no. It's like, he asked me how I run my team. What are my pain points? What do I think of the company? What do I think of, what do we need to address? What are the priorities in my mind? And he listened, and that really starting my process in the culture. Okay, I can go and meet with you. This isn't big bad C-suite coming down, to do whatever. This is, hey, look, I want to partner with you. I want to hear your perspectives. I want to be involved and make this better for you and ultimately for the company.
Yeah, I think if I can just jump in really quick, it's in these situations, this is really your competitive advantage. Being consultants, we can go into 30 companies and we might find one company like this that is collaborating. And if you can break down those barriers and get them working together and get them working as a team, that is your competitive advantage.
Agreed.
Good, all good comments, guys. Just quick time check. It's 12:50. Want to make some time for Q&A. Can we go to the next slide, please? We talked a lot about the swarming. Brett, I don't think we need to cover this. The next slide. Can you talk about how security was involved in your digital transformation?
Yeah, sure. I'll make it brief. Now we have to kind of move on. Just like what Bob and Jim started with, I mean, we're a smaller company. We rely on a number of trusted suppliers, people that have access to our systems. We then also house data for studios, and you mentioned Netflix and movies and all this kind of stuff. Security lives at the front of the mind. It has to. There's too much at stake not to. And so as we were looking at this, okay, how do we do this while still being as secure, if not more secure, than we were before we did it? And that became a very big piece in the ERP, in the data, in the KPIs, in the communication, et cetera. It has to be secure. And as we're vetting the solutions that we're thinking of, that was always like the leading question. How secure is this? Why is it secure? Do we believe it's secure? And then we would do the same thing. I think Jim and Bob are referencing. Let's go talk to some of our other suppliers, customers, competitors even. What do you think of these solutions? Are they vetted? Do they know the right people? Do we have the right stuff? Great. Let's kind of work together on this, because just like any of the other companies, if something like that were to happen to us, then we're out of business. So it's a life or death kind of decision for us.
Security isn't just a technology issue. It's just risk management. The general counsel needs to be involved, CEO needs to be involved, CFO needs to be involved. Everyone needs to. We're going to transition this over to Billy. When we talk about security, it's not just about the tech, right? And so, Billy, do you mind giving us a rundown of how to translate the security into business talk?
Yeah, so absolutely. So my goal in this talk is really to get you to understand that security needs to understand what is important to the business. And conversely, the business needs to understand what's important for security. The concept security by design is about considering tactics and security patterns from the beginning. Every aspect of your business is going to have data that is valuable and essential, and you may not even be aware of all of it. So mapping it all out from the start with that beautiful red and yellow chart we saw earlier is absolutely essential. But secure by design really isn't just about software. The principles are incorporating security and risk management and best practices into everything: building, designing, transforming, integrating, all of these things. Securing software and data and handling these integrations in a secure way needs to be efficient and painless as well, though. And the only way that you can really do that is to start tackling it and considering it from the start. A couple of things to consider. We've had some great speakers. Brett already mentioned company-wide priority setting and knowledge mapping. That's absolutely essential. You need to know what you've got. Bob also talked about that a bit. And then Bob really started giving some great examples of secure by design, where he talked about pre-planning for an eventual breach. The negotiating contracts, again, brilliant. Having canned PR responses. That might sound mundane, but being able to push out an email immediately to all the people who may respond instantly is essential. So anyway, so we'll get to the slide here. When you talk to your tech and security leaders, you can ask them, tell me, how are we securing our data assets? And what you're going to want to hear is that your security team understands the criticality of your data, whether it's employee data, customer data, product data. You've probably heard the term checkbox security. And if you look at this left-hand column here, that checkbox security isn't necessarily bad. It's just not complete. I think I've got time for a quick sort of imaginary story, because I see Jim, and so I need to be able to make a space story. Imagine if when they were building the space shuttle, they thought, okay, we have this giant hunk of metal coming back into orbit. We're going to hit some thick atmosphere. It's going to get really hot. Let's cover this whole thing in heat shielding. Well, if they really just said, okay, heat shielding, check, they may have spent a lot of time thinking, okay, here are the windows, here are the flexi bits up at the top. How do we heat shield that? And they would have ended up with fewer resources to consider what's really important, which is the bottom. So that bottom is going to get really hot. Let's focus on that. So again, it's not bad to say, okay, we've got heat shielding, but it could lead to a situation where you focused on the wrong point. So this is kind of a worksheet to help you with a jumping point. It's not complete. I can talk through these briefly, but some answer that you want to hear would be, you know what, we maintain this list of assets that you saw. We've classified all of our data, the risk, the priority, the value. We understand the flows and the access points. We continually update all of this information. We know why we're encrypting stuff and where. And so those are a number of the things. And again, checkbox security and security by design are they're buzzwords. But when it comes down to it, you want to actually be able to have a discussion where you can talk about some of these deeper things, as opposed to you say, oh, you know what, we've got in firewall, we've got encryption, we've got antivirus, single sign-on, we're good. Or where I'm going to lead into Nicole here, it's handled by the service provider. And so with that, I'm going to just toss this over to Nicole.
Great. Next slide, please. So, supply chain security, when you think about it, it's, Billy was talking about buzzwords. It is a big buzzword right now. Everybody, because of SolarWinds, it's everybody's talking about, you got to have supply chain security. What is that? But what I think I want people to kind of take away here is that, with this, security is such a huge landscape. And when you're trying to leave here and go, okay, can this happen to me? What do I need to think about? Where do I focus my attention? It's really on the kind of two big aspects that, one is supply chain security, and the other is really secure by design that Billy talked about briefly. But so first of all, let me explain what is supply chain security. It's not new, but what does that mean? It's really simply the insurance and the protection that you put in place in like the various layers of like your own business ecosystem that will sufficiently reduce the impact of a breach. So basically, it's just security in your supply chain. I mean, it's really easily said, but very hard to execute. So in this example here, one of the things that I think is really critical to understand and to kind of narrow the focus is one of the things that I get a lot from leaders is, okay, my business is big, it's complicated. Where do I start? I have no idea where to start. What do I do? What do I tackle first? So if you go back to kind of that heat map that we keep referring to back, or that you had those mega processes, well, if you take those mega processes and really all those are what are your kind of business critical work streams, right? So like if, for instance, like if you're in a bank, one of your critical work streams could be like ATM services, or if you're in hospitality, then one of your critical work streams could be reservation systems, right? So really the leaders of the organization should agree upon, okay, what are the top mega processes, critical business work streams? And then you take those and you focus your security and your protection and your secure by design initially there first. And you make the process digestible by doing that. So if you kind of look at this example here, I just kind of got two generic critical business work streams. So if you look at a supply chain based attack, you can see here we've got a supply chain. In that first example, the breach starts further back into the supply chain, and then it kind of progresses forward. One thing to note on here, as it progresses forward, you can see if you compare the two businesses on the end of the delivered service, the top one that has more of a secure by design model, which means layered security, security being thoughtful in the beginning and all of those things. Then you really have the breach impact is narrower. It doesn't project farther into the business ecosystem. It's contained. And when you look here, supply chain security, where it comes into effect into this first example, is that you don't have basically the vendor risk assessment kind of failed here. I would say maybe the vendors this particular work stream or these particular vendors, maybe they weren't researched well. Maybe they had security vulnerabilities where they couldn't actually stop the attack from happening before it reached the service, right? Sometimes it's completely avoidable, as we saw with supply chain, the SolarWinds attack. So in this particular example, you see that it started early in the change, but even though that it failed to stop in the different kind of points in this particular work stream, the end of the delivered services is that when it reaches your company, it is so contained that the impact is minimized. And whereas in the second example, this one we're saying, okay, this example, the actual breach happened later down the supply chain, but the breach impact was huge. It was explosive, right? And there's a lot of security gaps. There wasn't a really good way for the business to recover. And again, as they talked about earlier, some of the complexities with supply chain attacks is that it comes from trusted suppliers, right? These are businesses you already trust, so they have a way in. So just to kind of wrap this up, since we're out of time, some of the key takeaways I would like you guys to think about this is that, or some of the things that I think as CEOs, you should be asking your leadership is basically, do we have a grasp on those mega processes? What are those? What are our risk priorities? What is the blast impact, right? Or the blast radius if something were to happen in our business against just those critical processes? Can we survive this? What's the financial impact? And are our investment strategies aligned with these critical business services?
Yeah, and it requires, already mapping out your mega processes, understanding how all your departments integrate and work together. And so thanks for bringing that all back there, Nicole.
Sure.
It's 101. Wanted to get into Q&A. If anyone can stay around, we're in Q&A mode at this point. There's a question about the Microsoft Exchange hack. Can someone go over what that hack is and whether we should be worried about it or not, and how we can deal with that today? Bob, did you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take it. I'll try and keep it brief and simple. It's an attack that is currently ongoing, and Microsoft has already released a patch for it. So there's about 4 vulnerabilities that are being used in succession to gain access to email servers, Microsoft Exchange email servers that are out there. And Microsoft has identified it, released patches for it. But I think that there's some companies that are slow to either for valid or invalid reasons, slow to patch the servers. Sometimes there's dependencies that prevent you from being able to patch. And they're still vulnerable, and those are the ones that we're hearing about still today.
So this is for on-premise Exchange servers.
It's for companies that are running their own Exchange servers, yes. And I guess the differentiator would be Exchange servers versus companies that have moved to Microsoft's Office 365 product, which is not affected.
Got it. What about the general cloud? With the supply chain breach like this, everyone's affected. Microsoft, Google, AWS, everyone's affected. What's your general feeling on the cloud? Is it safe? Or should we be worried?
So can I jump in on that? First of all, we were early adopters of cloud computing. And so we went through the whole security element early on. And I would say that I felt more confidence in the cloud when I started talking to the security people in the cloud enterprises, and the fact of what they would do and how they would segment. You still have responsibility for your implementation within the cloud. And so you can expose a poorly formed web server. It can still be hacked, whether it's in the cloud or not. It's what happens after that you want to make sure you have a good cloud partner, and that they notify you if they see things, because they provide extra eyes. Now, all that means is, and where we're seeing transformations take us, because transformations have been highly enabling by cloud and cloud computing. What you're going to see, though, is more and more of your data in various clouds, not just the hyperscalers like AWS or Google or the others. You're going to see things like Workday, Oracle, the ERPs like Brett talked about. They're going to be delivered primarily and supported primarily in the cloud. So you're going to start seeing more and more, where you're going to be looking at cloud computing as your norm, and data centers as more of the edge computing type or the on-prem for specialized interaction of data. So I see this as a great advantage because you can move at a faster rate, but you also know that you still have to have good security practices. It doesn't come by default, but you get an extra set of eyes if you manage it well within cloud computing as well.
Yeah. It's all about the velocity of being able to change your business processes quickly, reacting to market trends. Building that in the cloud is so much faster, and there's an economies of scale of the kind of money that these cloud providers are able to put into security, into their cloud infrastructures that just you can't compete with. It's very safe in the cloud. Yep. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I know we're a little late. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us. We'd love to spend some time with you individually to see what's going on in your network and your business, and see if we can help. Until next time, thank you, everyone.